Live from Liverpool, The Dark Paranormal, Season 21.
Hello everyone and welcome back, unbelievably, already to the midpoint of Season 21. That's right, it's Episode 5 in the blink of an eye. That's not the title, that's just how quickly it feels we've reached this point. I always feel like Episode 5 within any season is like the height of the seesaw. So we've kind of climbed our way up and we're now at the midpoint. And the next 5 episodes, we start heading, as we like to do, into the much darker territory of the experiences that we've received, obviously culminating in our finale. And obviously, we're entering the Halloween season, where we get all of the people who are generally not interested in the paranormal coming on board, but we're not gatekeepers, we welcome them with open arms. Every experience is a brand new experience, and don't forget, guys, if you have your own personal paranormal experience that you want to share with the show, irrelevant of length, head over to thedarkparanormal.com and click on Submit My Experience, or click the link in the show notes. And don't worry if your experience is only a paragraph in length, or 5 paragraphs, or 3 pages, 6 pages, we will find an audience for it somewhere. Because if recent seasons have proven anything to me, it's that the one thing this show seems to do, and it was never intended to, is bring people together in their experiences in terms of being able to open up about things they've never felt they could open up about. But I genuinely do believe, and this is not hyperbole, that this podcast community is one of the safest places online that you will find in terms of both support, in terms of communication, in terms of basically not the general paranormal group you would find online. We don't have or want admins, moderators, or the sort of people who proclaim themselves to be a dark lord or more powerful than everyone else who listens. It's a genuine human connection about something absolutely subhuman and terrifying. And in line with that statement, I of course need to tell you all the best way to integrate yourself with this wonderful like-minded community is by joining our Patreon. Now right now, we are offering a free week Patreon's access at our highest tier, which not only gives you early ad-free access to everything on the main feed, but full access to not only the weekly Dark Bites episodes, but the entire back catalogue of Dark Bites, which is now around 130 hours in length. Each 30-minute episode containing between 2 or 5 or 6 sometimes shorter stories which have been sent to us by real listeners and their real experiences that were just not long enough for a main episode. That community is made up of both skeptics, and that's what happens when you have a cat in your studio or your temporary studio and all of your musical equipment whilst the main studio is being created. Anyway, that group is made up of skeptics and believers alike, and genuinely, if I was not the host of the show, I would be a member of that community. And I know that could sound very easily a lie, but I am being sincere. It's right up my street. It's the sort of people I, as someone who doesn't believe themselves to be some sort of mystic, but does believe in the paranormal, would be sincerely interested in joining. It's right up my street. So, simply head over to patreon.com/The Dark Paranormal. And for anyone listening thinking, why didn't he edit out that cat? Well, she lives here, it's her home too, and as I don't yet have the studio converted, it's a long story involving me drilling holes in walls and turning off electricity in the process. She can do what she wants, and it's going to be left in unless I'm actually reading the story. Don't worry, when I'm reading today's experience, if Nova decides to come and try and create some noise, I'll make sure it is edited out and spoils no one's journey through the experience. But before we were rather rudely, interrupted by Nova, we were about to read out the names of our newest wonderful team members. And so, a big thank you to Murray Broyette, Johnny Talbot, Audrey Reader, April, Jess Moore, Christopher Rodriguez, Nadine Vella, Robert Strickland, Andrew Todd, Phil Porter, Jennifer Walters, Rodrigo, Patty Edwards, Bianca Fuentes, CM Clevenger, Winnie May, Chill I Am, Jonah, June, Don Be Cursed, and John Friday. Sincerely, guys, thank you ever so much for supporting an independent creator who's putting out something that you guys seem to really enjoy. I genuinely appreciate it from the bottom of my heart, and for anyone who's in a position like many people are, where they cannot support the show but wish they could, then don't worry, you can support the show in any other way, all free. Leave a nice comment, tell people about the show, share the show. There are many ways to support the show which are non-monetary. Even the simplest thing is, wherever you're listening to my voice right now, just click subscribe, and that helps the show massively. With more ears listening to our show, we get more experiences, we get more points of view. And one thing I've found with this show is my point of view, my perspective on the paranormal has changed multiple times. I've listened to and created theories I never would have if not for the people writing in. So, if you do wish to join Patreon, patreon.com/The Dark Paranormal, or click the link in the show notes, or do whatever you can to help the show grow and help all of us gain a better perspective of what we all love. But right now, it's time. Lower those lights, make yourself comfortable, and of course, leave your disbelief at the door, as we hear all about a demon at the door. Hello, Kevin. I'm sure you're already aware, based on my email address, that my name is not actually Adam. However, it will be for the purposes of my retelling of this story. While the events in my story are certainly true, other aspects such as names, specific locations, etc. have been altered. I would like to be the first to take a moment to say I'm glad to have a platform to comfortably share my story, should you find it eligible for your show. I'm unsure how to begin this story, so I suppose I will simply begin. Throughout my life, there have been various happenings that have occurred that I believe have prepared me for the main story that I would like to share today. As if the universe, in some capacity, knew that I would eventually be right here, where I belong. My first paranormal experience being as a child, an only child, and an overprotected one at that, one who, at the time, had never even seen a scary movie, not even one made for kids. Well, my grandparents had a full playroom in their basement for my cousin and I. My cousin was Gabriel. At the bottom of the basement stairs was a closet, and it terrified me. I had no real reason to feel afraid of this closet in association with a basement, aside from the darkness before flipping on the light. But every time I saw that closet door, it terrified me. My dad would always say it was because that's where my grandparents stored the plastic skeleton for Halloween decorations. Eventually, I forced myself into believing that was why I was scared. Although I could feel whatever was in my bones, and although I can't rationally explain it, I knew I didn't like it. And I knew my fear of the closet was not due to the skeleton. One evening, whilst my grandparents were entertaining upstairs, my cousin Gabriel and I, and a few of our friends, who were actually the grandchildren of our grandparents' friends, were all playing in the basement. Gabriel, my cousin, is a year older than I, and was always allowed to do so much more than I ever was. He had watched scary movies, he was allowed to play violent video games, and he knew how to mess with me. He was literally the older brother I never had, and didn't want. He locked me in that closet at the bottom of the basement stairs. And even though I was afraid at first, I didn't think I had any reason to be. All of the fear I had about that closet completely vanished. I did slightly panic when he pushed me in and locked the door, and I can still remember the tickling on my arm from the drawstring attached to the light as I reached up to pull the light on. but for some reason I couldn't grasp it. So I looked up, and I regretted that decision for years. And ultimately, I would come to regret ever telling the story to anyone that would listen, as they simply wouldn't and did not believe me. But when I looked up, I saw a face. I saw a face stuck to the ceiling of the dark closet. I couldn't see much detail, but I knew I wasn't supposed to be there, and I felt like all of the air was sucked out of my lungs. I was staring confused at the ceiling of this closet. Then the adrenaline kicked in, and my gut feeling started screaming at me to get out of that closet no matter what. I began wailing. I knew that my cousin and friends had all ran back up the stairs to the main floor. I was absolutely petrified to look back up, so I stared instead at the plastic skeleton. Eventually, my pap came down and let me out of the closet. I was completely devastated, and I still remember the pounding headache that I had from sobbing nearly uncontrollably. I tried to tell my family, especially my grandmother, what had happened, but no one would hear any of it. No one ever wanted to hear about it again. Fast forward a few years later, my parents bought a new home, and we were moving in. I was maybe 8 or 9, and this home was much larger than our previous rental. This one was all ours. I was so excited to have my own playroom, which was the entirety of the attic. I loved it. When we first looked at the house, I noticed a small door in my bedroom. The door opened just by pulling on it, and it was a small crawl space, additional storage. My dad told me it would be a cool place to hang out. I stuck my head into the space and had 3 flashes of memories that I've never experienced before. I had terrible visions of people moving in that crawl space, which, years later, was very reminiscent of the scene in The Sixth Sense. I shook my head at my dad, never-ending visions of what they were, and when it was time to move in, I threw all the stuff in there that I wouldn't regularly need, like sleeping bags and various other items. I packed that little storage space full. I never felt anything from that crawl space for the rest of the time we lived there. But the same cannot be said about the hall closet. As I'd mentioned previously, these accounts are all leading to a larger story. One day, when we were moving in, my mum yelled upstairs to me to tell me that she was going to pick up a pizza. It was around this time that my parents had begun leaving me by myself, as the neighbourhood we'd moved into was vastly better than the neighbourhood we left, and as an overprotected child, not only wasn't I rambunctious, but I was quite mature for my age. So I yelled back down the steps, "Okay, Mum." A few moments later, I'm still playing in the attic, and I hear her yell back upstairs again, "Adam, get your coat. We're going to get the pizza." Didn't she just tell me she was leaving and would be right back? I thought. I then thought, well, maybe she changed her mind and wants me to go with her. I began walking down the attic stairs to the second story and eventually down to the main level. Once I reached the foyer, I noticed how empty the house felt. The thought of needing a coat or lack thereof didn't even occur to me, as this was mid-July if I remember correctly. But following my mum's orders, I went to retrieve my coat from where they were all hung, the hall closet. But I wasn't tall enough to reach the drawstring light, and neither were the grandkids of the previous owners, so there was a small stool there for people to use my size that had been left. I stepped up onto the stool and decided to jump off the stool as soon as I'd grabbed the drawstring, wanting to land like a superhero, and I did. Except when I landed on the ground, nearly on all fours, what I saw under the base of all those hanging coats took my entire breath away, and still puts chills all over my body to this day. It was a pair of black, dirty, old boots that didn't belong to any of us. I stared at them for a split second longer than I should have, because I noticed there were legs in them. And as well as memory serves me, I do believe those legs began to move. I was petrified that someone was going to kidnap me. After all, this was one of the main things I was informed of as a danger: kidnapping. I slammed that closet door shut and started screaming for my mum. I ran back into the foyer and I looked out of the window and her car was in the driveway. She must have got back home. I opened the front door and started screaming for her, and she was nowhere to be found. I didn't dare go back into that house, because I knew for sure that that man with the boots was going to take me. When I turned round, Mum was there. She was in the house, a horrified look on her face. She was so worried about me. "What the hell's going on?" she said. I told her what had happened, about her yelling up about the pizza, the man in the closet. She blinked a few times. Now, I have a fantastic relationship with my mother, so I can tell you exactly what she was thinking just from looking. And then she said it out loud, which were the words I knew were coming but didn't want to hear. "We're not having pizza tonight. I was in the basement doing laundry and I didn't call you. It must have been someone walking down the street or something." During the rest of the time in that house, I never had one more occurrence with the boot man. However, from that time on, I would see a black figure of a man wearing a hat in the corner of our formal living room until the day we moved out. We moved out post my parents' divorce. I was 10 or 11, and my father decided that we were going to stay overnight more often with his new girlfriend, Mary. Now, Mary came from a very wealthy family, especially by the standards of our small town. She lived on a hill and had a beautiful view. Her home was an old, large-style Tudor house. Fast forward again about 2 years, and Jerry, my father, and Mary, his girlfriend, my new stepmom, had married, and we were all living together full-time. No more nights in the old house where the bootman was. From the moment I left that house, I could feel a sense of relief to some regard. It felt fresh, new, like a brand new start. We were out of the house where so much drama happened, so much family turmoil, not to mention the spooky things. And it just felt lighter. I no longer had to think about the Hat Man lurking in the corner, and I hadn't realised just how much dealing with all of that on a daily basis was. But I'd grown used to it for years. Living with Mary was like something fresh and new, like a beautiful, bright, clean white light. My energy was back. I was happier. My father was happier. And I also gained a stepbrother, one 6 years younger than I, Andrew. Andrew loved sport and still does. He could play any sport you can think of. One year, he was on a Sunday bowling league, and I had to go with them every morning and subject myself to the loud racket of balls and pins and the smell of old cigarette smoke from years gone by. Well, one Saturday, I woke up and looked at the clock. Andrew's bowling must be cancelled, I thought. We would have well left by now. I looked from my window and saw all the fresh snow on the street and sidewalk from the night before. No tyre tracks in the driveway. From my room, in the front of the Tudor-style home, I could hear conversation, the clanking of dishes and silverware. They must have a week off or something, and were having people over for breakfast, I thought. After all, social interactions, even for breakfast, were very common with this affluent family. I could hear music, like smooth jazz or instrumental music, which would be right on par for the sort of parties they host. I went to the restroom, next to my bedroom, and brushed my teeth. I put on some presentable clothing and slowly walked down the grand staircase, running my hand along the banister on the way down. The conversation, dinging and clanking, and the music all grew louder with each step. I looked towards the foyer, and when I reached the first landing, I could smell bacon and breakfast foods, and I was excited to be having something like this rather than an old bowling alley. By the time I reached the lowest landing of the staircase, my mouth was salivating, although I should have been seeing people, and I saw no one. Walking through that foyer, it was like everyone and everything, including the music, had all travelled at once into a room further away, the sound now more distant. When I reached the dining room, sweeping my head from left to right to see if anyone was in the house, there was still no one there. I took one step into the dining room, and everything stopped. The chatter, the commotion, the music, the clanking, it all stopped. Because there was no one home. Their car wasn't in the drive. I went back to my room and I watched a movie to try and calm down. That was yet another encounter where I know wholeheartedly what I experienced, but my family will not listen nor entertain the story to this day. To them, it didn't happen. But I know what I heard and smelled. I even tried to plead my case to my father, telling him to look at the piano keys in the dining room. One key was stuck down, and that out-of-tune piano hadn't been played in years. But he thought it was an elaborate scheme. A few years later, in that same house, I was going through a lot. As a gay teenager, high school was not easy. Mix in some puberty woes and family dynamic issues, and I was a ball of anxiety constantly. Plus, my stepmother had taken to drinking. A lot, and always. Daily. She was extremely narcissistic and released copious amounts of negative energy into that home daily, from her rage and outbursts driven by her unhappiness and depression, which were caused by longing for authenticity and recognition that she didn't work for, therefore wasn't receiving. Her success came from her parents, nothing more, and that drove her nearly insane. I'd been given the smallest bedroom in the house. My younger brother, who didn't stay with us often and would primarily live with his grandparents around this time, was given the largest bedroom. I wasn't allowed to sleep in his room as it wasn't mine. Even though he hardly had any clothing in its closets, they were all at his grandparents'. Nevertheless, I tried my best to get on with my room and decorated it as best I could. Despite its cramped size and children's nursery-style wallpaper, for whatever reason which I'm sure was blown out of proportion, as they often were, I'd lost the privilege of shutting my door all the way. One night, while I was still being punished and unable to shut my door, I encountered my first, and thankfully only, to date, occurrence of sleep paralysis. I'd awoken from a nightmare about what I couldn't tell you, as what happened next seemed to erase the nightmare from my memory, as it was far more terrifying. I opened my eyes and looked into the darkness, seeing the glow in the dark stars that were covering the wallpaper and ceiling, and I turned my head to witness the most terrifying thing I've ever dealt with in my life. There, in my doorway, stood the most dark, evil, unnatural thing. It was short, squatty, like hunched over, and appeared to move in a very non-fluid way, as if with a cane. It seemed to be in pain when it did move, lots of bending and contorting. And then, it flew straight into my room and got right into my face, so close that I couldn't make out a single detail. I tried to scream. I can still recall the overwhelming sensation of every single solitary hair on my body standing on end as I tried to scream for my father. I slammed my eyes shut and pressed my head as far back into that pillow as I could. When I opened my eyes again, I could move my body. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but as soon as I could physically move, I screamed for my father in a way that was, and honestly still is, rather embarrassing for a teenage boy. But I very sternly declared there was someone in this house. I refused to go back to sleep. I knew he would shrug this off, as he didn't want to wake up his wife, who had just recently drifted off to sleep after falling asleep at the bar in the dining room, like every night. "Adam, the alarm didn't go off," he said plainly. "It's impossible for anyone to be in this house," he continued. Well, I accepted his reply as fact, and eventually I fell back asleep. Now, after covering that handful of experiences that I've retained over my life, it's now time for the main story that brought me to you. I'm now 31 years old. I live with my husband Eric in yet another small town in Ohio in the United States. This town was founded in large part by the anti-slavery movement prior to the American Civil War. The home we've bought is perfect for us. It was built in 1829 and is the oldest house in our town that is still livable. This is thanks in large part to the previous owner of the home, who spent a large amount of her retirement and fortune restoring it. The home we recently moved into, May 2025, is a large red brick colonial-style home. From the instant we viewed the house, we knew we wanted to live there. I did have my qualms about the basement, especially a basement being nearly 200 years old. But the agent assured us there was no basement, and even showed us the crawl space, which seemed much brighter and larger than I would have ever imagined. During both viewings of the home, I never felt anything out of the ordinary. Upon moving in, I still didn't feel anything. Aside from that it didn't feel quite like home yet, which I expected. Once we had everything loaded in the house, we were left with physical paths on the first floor to lead us in and out of the rooms. These paths were woven between boxes and furniture. After we had loaded everything in, we'd returned back to our previous home to retrieve our animals. My longest friend, Riley, and her boyfriend, Aaron, stayed at the house and waited for us to come back. When we returned with the animals, they had a million questions, and they were both acting strange. They asked if we'd returned to the house, and were asking if we were running around upstairs. Now, granted, we did forget our keys and we did need to go back into the house and go upstairs to our bedroom to get them. But we certainly weren't running or stomping around. And yes, even though this house is old, it's a brick fortress. You can hardly hear anything outside of the room you're in. It would have been nearly impossible for them to have heard me upstairs unless I was physically stomping. I ignored them and just thought they were playing tricks on me, because it was a new, old house, and they knew I was already concerned about it being haunted, despite not feeling anything out of the ordinary with the place. A few days went by and I never heard anything similar to what both Riley and Aaron said they experienced. But when I would go downstairs of a night and walk through the dining room, I would feel this incredibly heavy energy. Never super close to me, always across the room on the other side of all the boxes and furniture. But whatever it wasn't happy. I genuinely just thought I was sleep deprived. What with all the house moves, the back and forthing, etc. It's just a big room in a big house that's full of stuff. This is all fine, I would reason with myself. Nights later, I was walking through the living room making sure the lights were off, doors were locked, etc. And I hear a strange noise come from the floor when I walked along our path. And it sounded like a note of some kind. I immediately went upstairs and woke up Eric, praying the whole time, internally, that whatever is happening downstairs would continue to happen. I got him out of bed and he reluctantly followed me down the stairs until about halfway when I told him to stay here. I walked into the living room and walked along the path. He heard it. "What is that?" he asked. "It sounds like a piano," he said. And in that moment, every hair stood on its end. That's exactly what it sounded like. Contrary to my previous experience with a piano, this wasn't an entire song. These were more specific notes being struck on the piano, affiliated with different random boards in the living room floor. This went on for days, morning, noon and night, and it was much louder at night. Eventually, I crawled into the crawl space beneath the living room just to try and make some sense of it all. But there was nothing that justified it. Then, one day, around noon, I yell for Eric and shout, "You're never going to believe this!" Eric rushes into the living room to see me. And there I was, stood in front of the couch, in a space that had previously been covered with boxes and things, and I started distributing my weight back and forth between two boards. Each board played its own unique, whole, on-key piano note each time. One note for my left, one for my right. Eric stood there in disbelief. He didn't know what to say. He attempted to do it too, and it wouldn't. I tried again, and it played the two notes. I knew in that moment that someone was trying to tell me something. Mind you, this was not the only thing that was occurring during this time. I was watching my dog walk off into the yard as if she was being called. She would sit in the middle of the yard, doing seemingly nothing, as if she was sat next to her actual owner, just as she would when she sat next to Eric or I. Another time, it was evening, and she got up from where she was laying next to me and disappeared. Granted, we do have a decent-sized yard, but I couldn't see her anywhere. I began calling for her. "Anna! Anna!" I was yelling. Eventually, I found her, after walking into the yard and along the driveway. She was sat only 5 feet from me, a distance she should have clearly heard me from. And she was sitting, as still as stone, staring at the gates that block our driveway. I walked up close to her to see if there was something that she could see that I hadn't yet, and it was like she was in a trance or another world. Eventually, after I couldn't take any more of being weirded out, and all of my red flags had gone off, I sternly said her name, "Anna," and she jumped out of her fur. I have never in my life, whether it be real life, in a film of a dog react, or anything like that, seen a dog react in that way, ever. It was like she stuck her paw in an electrical socket. Her fur stood on end when she saw me. It was like she couldn't believe I was me, as if I'd come back from the dead or something. Granted, she wasn't being bad, so it's not like I caught her in the act or something. She was just sat there. Then she immediately returned to sitting there, still, calm, and then another look back at whatever I couldn't see before completely running over to me like she normally does. During this time, I also saw my cats, who are by no means kittens, playing with something I could not see. Also, any time I would feel something strange come over me when I was in the house, still to this day, my black cat Salem will appear. And strangely enough, when Salem appears, that feeling goes away. It's like he knows. They haven't hissed or made any indication that they're scared or in danger, but I would have preferred that they had, because the next encounter would have been nice had I been prepared for it. Since we moved in during the summer, I'd been spending a lot of time outside in the evenings, smoking. Sometimes a cigarette, other times a cigarette and a joint. When I returned to the house, I entered through the second-story kitchen. One night I noticed there was a strange feeling in that kitchen. I felt watched, similar to the dining room, but much, much heavier. It feels like there's a teacher watching over your shoulder during an exam. I even found myself resorting to an old trick that I would do as a child that I'd completely forgotten about. Singing and humming to make yourself feel better as soon as I got that gut feeling. What I call an upside-down pressure feeling in your gut when you know evil is around. During this first encounter, I looked at the clock. It was 9:15. As days went on, I continued feeling this strange pressure feeling. Sometimes it was enough to knock the wind out of me, like I'd just been tackled. I'd try my best to breathe through it and just get through the kitchen. Some days I would talk to it, but never give it a name. I'd joke with it. "It's me again, the guy who gets on your nerves." Silly comments like that. Trying to make light of a situation, or maybe trying to get myself out of my own head. "You're just stoned," I'd tell myself. Or I'd try to tell myself. Being stoned, I was also forgetting things, and I'd have to return to the upstairs kitchen. Always after 9 p.m. And I always dreaded it because I knew what I was in for. That pressure, that feeling, that anxiety. Some nights it wasn't in there with me at all, but it would make itself known by the time I reached the back stairwell. It would feel like someone was just waiting to jump out, and that's because they likely were. They wanted to scare me, but that's because they knew I knew they were there. About a week into me experiencing this energy in the upstairs kitchen, we were pretty well settled in the dining room and decided to invite our friends over, Kevin and Ashley. Up front, Kevin said that his girlfriend, Ashley, was pretty in tune with her psychic abilities, and as soon as she arrived from work, she asked, "Who else is here with us?" Well, I didn't understand her question at first, and I wanted to answer, "No one, just us." But as soon as I really understood her question, my stomach sank into my ass. I knew she knew. That, and someone's just threw a load of paper towels at me in the powder room. "What?" I said, springing from my seat. "It's fine," she said. "I just need to see the rest of the house." We opted to smoke another joint together before the grand tour. We made it all through the house and she didn't comment on feeling anything out of the ordinary. That was until we got to the back kitchen, where she went extremely quiet and said, "I don't like this at all. This is heavy and it's dark. There's a lot of emotion here," she said. As we continued walking through the house, we were talking about the home builders who were the first to live here back in 1829. Ashley started asking me if I knew how they died, which I didn't. I did, however, have a packet of information that was given to Eric and I when we signed for the property. I showed Ashley some of the historical documents and photos that were given to us of owners gone by, the White family. Immediately, Ashley said her entire stomach was tense. Strangely, the same feeling I had. The one I'd been walking around for days with. The one I thought was just related to my anxiety disorder. But apparently not, because in that moment it came back tenfold. Ashley told me what to do. I needed to sage. A few nights later, I encountered, in the upstairs kitchen, that same heavy presence. But this time it felt stronger. It felt closer and heavier. I left the kitchen humming a song and shut the door behind me. I was immediately hit with this overwhelming feeling to run. I needed to run fast. But logically, I knew this wasn't necessary. I also kept wanting to look back, although I felt if I did, I was going to be killed or harmed. I walked away briskly, fully into our bedroom, and I turned around to see what the fuck was behind me. I turned around and nothing. Absolutely nothing. This was sheer terror. I'd never had this much terror before. This is much more than a phantom feeling of someone chasing you up the basement stairs or something. My heart was racing. I felt like I'd escaped something, and I didn't want to deal with this anymore. And I was sick of my husband not listening to me about it. The only thing he would believe me about were those piano stairs, and that's because he physically saw and heard them with his own eyes and ears. So I called the secretary of the seller, whom inherited the home from his mum. His secretary, Linda, was more than willing to come over and discuss the home with me. She told me all about the previous owner, Janine, and how long she's known the family for. I was careful not to insinuate that I actually thought the home was haunted, because I didn't want to offend anyone. But eventually, after Linda and I built some rapport, it was obvious why I had invited her to the house. I think she could tell from my eyes. She did admit that Janine did pass away in the home, nearly 100 years old, and that she spent upwards of $1 million on the home over her lifetime. It was her pride and joy, regardless of what her husband thought. Linda told me that Janine despised cluster, and while she loved animals, she hated the fur and hair, especially in the house. Linda admitted to me that if Janine were to be in the house, she would not like all the clutter. She also wouldn't love the 2 cats and the dog, Anna. I brought up what my friend Riley and her boyfriend experienced, and she said that Janine had very specific rules about the house for her son to sell it. It couldn't become a business, although that's almost all that was interested in the large home. No one was wanting it for a family home. She also wanted people who were going to appreciate living in it. She didn't want any immediate renovations, as renovations genuinely weren't needed, thanks to her incredible amount of input in both time and resource, aka money. Linda said, "If what you're saying's true, then Janine was here when everyone looked at the house. She chose you to live here. She wanted you and Eric," she said, smiling. Which would explain why Janine may have been stomping ground on the 2nd floor when Eric and I left. She didn't want Riley and Aaron living here. She wanted Eric and I. Naturally, there used to be a baby grand piano in the living room, the bench for which sat right where I was bouncing between those 2 boards and hearing different notes. All the hairs on my arm stood on end, and Linda must have noticed. So I told her what I had experienced. I also told her I haven't been able to replicate the noises the boards were making since we cleared all the furniture and clutter from the living room. She looked at me and simply said, "That's her." Alternatively, however, I've spoken to others in the area who believe that it may be a combination between both Janine and an older spirit. Considering how old our home and land is, I burnt sage and opened windows, hoping for the spirit to leave and be at peace. After doing so, I was overcome with an extreme feeling of happiness as I stood in the foyer. But I still, to this day, feel that presence in the upstairs kitchen, as long as it's after 9:15 p.m. Is that in my head? Am I paranoid? Or is it just when I'm stoned? What I'm worried about is I may have gotten rid of the good spirit and kept the bad one. I'll keep you updated. Adam. Well, Adam, of course not your real name, thank you so much for providing this season's midpoint episode. Now, it's intriguing, well, your initial parts in terms of what you saw in that closet, what you experienced in the bedroom doorway, that's horrific. That would imply something seems to be either attached to you or you do have some sort of ability. Now, your parting comments where you state you're not sure whether you got rid of the good spirit and left the bad one, saging the house, etc. I have a strange up and down relationship with the entire cleansing of a house scenario. I do believe it needs to be done by someone who fully understands what they're doing. I, for example, bought an allegedly haunted old gambling table. I think it was made in Victorian times. I got it refelted, put it in the back room, and a friend of mine who claimed to be psychic turned up and said they got really bad vibes from it. There was something negative attached to the table. They then opened the windows and saged the table. I allowed them to do it and watched on sheerly out of interest. Obviously, it's my realm of interest. But then I couldn't help but wonder, how expert are you at what you're doing? I've known you all my life and you're a civil servant. Now, that's not to say you can't be both a civil servant and an expert at what this is. However, if you do anything wrong, and there is something in this table which I personally didn't feel, what if you've just dragged it from the table and left it in the house? And it hasn't followed this civil servant orders to fly out of the window away from bothering me with their mighty powers. What if all you've done is literally extract evil from a table and left me with it? Now, when I read these experiences, my brain runs through a series of scenarios and theories as I'm reading, and one that jumped out to me as I reached the end of this experience was perhaps Janine was in the room with you and the secretary whilst you had the conversation. And at that point, Janine felt, I don't need to be here anymore. He now fully understands what I was here to do. And that's the point she left. Now, when you get out the sage and you start trying to cleanse the house, this evil entity notices what some would call an occult ceremony taking place and is really happy that you've decided to tinker with things in that evil spirit's mind you don't fully comprehend, and therefore gains a certain glee. In most walks of life, with most situations, it's a well-held belief the more attention you pay something, the more power you give that situation, and walking away and ignoring it removes that power. So perhaps, and I'm not wishing this on you in any way, shape or form, that evil spirit has seen you sage the house and thought, oh, they want to interact with me. They want to play. And given the feeling you get when you're in that kitchen, that is not someone or something I would ever wish to play with. So please, Adam, do be careful. And do let us know if anything else takes place. But sincerely, thank you for this experience. It's definitely food for thought and a terrifying flag to place for our midpoint of season 21. Don't forget, guys, if you have your own paranormal experience, either click the link in the show notes or go direct to thedarkparanormal.com and you'll see there submit my experience. And of course, again, to gain access to the highest tier of our Patreon for one full free week with over 130 hours of stories and experiences you simply haven't heard, head over to patreon.com/thedarkparanormal or click the link again in the show notes. And until next time, as we start our steps to the darkest part of the season, I bid you all farewell, stay safe, and remember, when you discuss the paranormal, always leave some of your disbelief at the door. And I'll see you right here next time on the Dark Paranormal.